Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Rushanara.
Good morning. I want to ask some questions about Brexit risks to derivatives. The status of derivatives contracts have again been highlighted by the FPC as a significant Brexit financial stability risk. What are the consequences that would arise if these contracts could suddenly no longer be serviced? Governor, do you want to start?
I think it's important, as you can appreciate in previous conversations, to distinguish between cleared and uncleared derivatives. So if we start with the mass of uncleared derivative contracts, and so just we're all on the same page, we're talking about contracts between UK-based institutions. They could be a foreign bank that subsidiary here or a UK headquartered bank, and an institution that is in the EEA. Scale of that, detailed in the report, on the order of 26 trillion plus notional, 26, 27, I'll get my numbers. But the important thing, about 16 trillion of that matures following the Brexit date. Yep. So some of it could roll off, but the majority matures beyond. What happens, what potentially happens, at least as we stand right now, is that the EEA, the EU27, I'll simplify it to EU27 counterparty, will not be authorized to enter into that contract. So the contract will continue to be valid, legally valid, so it can be serviced. In other words, if it runs to maturity, the payment can be made. Still governed by English law, and we recognize that that is the case. The issue, the financial stability issue, is that what happens with these contracts is there are a series of so-called life cycle events over the life of the contracts. Sometimes they are rolled over. That's an obvious one. In many cases, for financial stability and capital preservation purposes, optimization purposes, trades are compressed, so a series of trades are brought together and reduced down into fewer trades, saving capital and collateral. There are embedded options in many cases in these contracts, et cetera, et cetera. The crucial point here is that on the day of leaving, the contract can still be serviced. However, life cycle events will start to accumulate, and arguably they will accumulate quite rapidly in the event of a cliff edge Brexit, because one would reasonably expect that volatility in markets would go up. How big is that potential risk? For a mid-sized firm, and we have done the due diligence on that, a mid-sized firm, there's about 1,000 life cycle events a month. For a large derivative counterparty, there's up to 250,000 a week. Okay, so you can pretty quickly, and if you think of it in the world of derivatives, hedging underlying positions, and the inability to conduct these life cycle events, you can, and an environment where there is volatility and the hedge or the risk increases with time, so the inability to dynamically hedge, you see a financial stability risk developing fairly quickly, in our opinion, and we have, of course, shared that opinion publicly through the FSR and directly with our counterparts in the EU. There are a separate set of issues, I'll try not to go on as long, with respect to cleared derivatives, and the issue is, to make it simple, is that effectively, as it would stand at present, the large UK-based clearinghouses would no longer be authorized clearinghouses by the EU following Brexit date, and therefore those counterparties, European counterparties who have cleared in those clearinghouses, their actions would be ultra vires. They would not be authorized to use those counterparties, those clearinghouses. Those clearinghouses know that, or would know that in advance, and so in advance, they would have to close out those positions. The European counterparties would have to close out the positions. Question is how rapidly that could be done. The orders of magnitude are much higher than they are. It's 60+ trillion notional of exposure, much higher than they are in the uncleared space. And that process, which we oversee as the Bank of England, as the regulator of these clearinghouses, would have to begin prior to the Brexit date. What we did, two final points. First, The UK government has signalled its intention and has developed statutory instruments which it will lay before Parliament as soon as practicable, given the summer recess timing. That's likely to be in the fall, but in a timely way that will solve the UK side of this issue, both authorization of EU CCPs, authorization of the EU counterparties. The European Union has not yet indicated a solution to this.
Dr. Carney, in the past when you've come and addressed these issues, you were much more optimistic, but time's running out. How do you feel about it now? Do you think the EU 27 are being irresponsible? What's gone wrong? Why are things not progressing as much as they should have done, as given your optimism in the past?
Well, it's the first person to describe any member of the FPC as optimistic. I think
more optimistic than you are now.
Well, I think we, to be clear, my personal view and the view of the committee, I believe colleagues are here can disagree if they wish, but we welcome the steps that the UK government has taken and their understanding of the issue and the fact that the UK is solving its side of this issue. Yes, we're concerned that the EU has not yet indicated its solution. There is time. Its solutions to their side of these issues. These are, to be absolutely clear, we are in no doubt that, I'll put in the positive, the private sector cannot solve these issues. There's not enough time for the private sector to solve these issues. And we know that, Mr. Bailey, Sir John, and others, Sam Woods, others, from actual experience in much, much smaller variants of this, of trying to novate contracts. I think the chair of this committee would be familiar with these issues as well. It just takes years to novate something on this scale. So this is absolutely an area where there needs to be a public sector solution. So,
Mr. Bailey, there are clearly the UK is doing what it needs to, but the EU 27 are not budging, and it's going to their expectation of businesses having to do this and prepare is within a much shorter time frame than what the governor's just said it's going to take. What are the consequences of that? What should we be expecting, given this mismatch? What do you see happening?
Well, I mean, I agree with everything the governor said about this, and obviously, as you'd expect, given our roles, our view is that this should be sorted out sooner rather than later. We welcome the fact that the UK government has taken the steps that it has and made the commitments it has. I also agree with the governor's assessment that it is too late now to expect the private sector to undertake this activity on its own unassisted. And so there is, you're right to say, a clear tension here, because there is a line that comes out of the EU, which is that these are matters that the private sector should deal with. And as I think we've discussed at previous hearings, I disagree with that. And I think it's unfortunate that this is now being tied up in the broader process. So obviously, wearing our hat, it would be much better if, frankly, this was taken off the table. It shouldn't be a sort of a chip, as it were, on the table. We have to keep making that point. We have to do all the preparations we can do. But as we've said, we can't make the preparations and act outside our own jurisdiction. We can point out the risks of this. I fully agree with the governor's assessment of the risks of this. I can't. I don't really have anything to add to that. It's a shared view.
So do you think it was naive for us to not expect it to be used as a chip? Governor.
I think this is best viewed as a.
Or is it a consequence of bad-tempered negotiations?
Well, it is a technocratic issue which has,
been politicized?
deep. It is being addressed. It is a core issue that is being discussed at the technical working group chaired by the Bank of England and the ECB, and the FCA is a member of that, and other jurisdictions, ESMA and others are members as required around these issues, and so. We are doing everything we can to develop a shared understanding of the seriousness of the issue. It is for the European side to determine how they would they would solve it. It should not be part of this has no precedential value to the end state relationship. It should not be viewed as such, and it's unfortunate if some on the continent view it that way. This is fundamentally about taking our responsibilities to protect the financial system, but very much the real economy from the financial system. Now, it's cold comfort, but it'll be worse in Europe than it is here.
But that message, Governor, with respect, doesn't seem to have got through yet. How confident are you that it is going to get through in time so that the consequences are not what we fear?
Well, we have, what we can do is, and we are doing, is to do the due diligence, to gather the evidence, share the evidence, understand the European perspective on, in some respects, the European analysis of this issue, in many respects, is lagging ours, but they have to do their own due diligence to come to that determination. The other thing we have to do as a committee, and we are doing, is to assume that this won't get solved. And then look at what the consequences would be for our institutions and make sure that they have the adequate capital liquidity and that we have the right facilities in place on the assumption it doesn't get solved. And that is what we're doing.
Great. I just have one final question. A while back, the Chancellor, when he was asked about what life would be like in the event of a no deal, he used... since we're in Farnborough, I have to quote him. He used the line about planes being grounded and much else. It was a very colourful evidence session that was widely reported. What are the consequences in the event of? Do you share that perspective in the event of a no deal, in the light of where we are right now?
Well, if we have no deal and no implementation period, there will be a situation. I would characterize it as it's a situation where we have issues such as we're discussing if they haven't been solved by other means. It is possible, by the way, to have no deal and have these issues solved. But so let's assume that, which is a glass half-full no-deal scenario. So Europe comes up with their analog to, or their equivalent solution to what the UK government has signaled. So we don't have the derivative problem. What we still would have, because that solution could just be for legacy contracts as opposed to on a go-forward basis, is a situation where there is extreme fragmentation of the European capital market, and a situation in the UK, which speaking strictly from a financial services perspective, where we have an excess of bankers, of capital, of collateral, of capacity in the financial sector. So in sterling markets, they will be affected by global developments, European developments, but actually the capacity would be there. There'll be a shortage of capital collateral capacity in Europe without question, which will take some time to adjust to. Now, I'm speaking very narrowly about the financial services side. I think we can all appreciate, in the aerospace sector as much as any, that in a no-deal scenario there would be big economic consequences. So we might have a lot of idle bankers because there's not a lot of demand for their services, but we will not have a shortage of capacity in the UK.
And you're going to hang around to make sure that we have an orderly transition, or that orderly movement in the event of no deal. This is an attempt to try and get commit to stay longer.
March comes before June. Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to bring Catherine in a moment. But